In today's tutorial, we're going to go over the first example in this series on procedural noise, and we're going to talk about one application of how to use procedural noise, and that is to create snowy tree trunks. One of the things that I didn't emphasize very well in last week's tutorial is that procedural noise can be volumetric, or it can be three-dimensional. And that's what I want to show you right now. So I have this example that I've created where I've placed down a procedural noise node, and I'm passing in here the world position multiplied by kind of a very small number. And then I pass that into my base color. And I've got this material applied to my material sphere here. And you can see that the settings on the procedural noise are set to fast gradient, and I've got turbulence turned on. And that creates an image that looks kind of like turbulent clouds on my material sphere here. Now remember, I said that the procedural noise is three-dimensional or volumetric, and what that means is as I move my sphere around my scene, it moves through the volume of noise. So the noise exists in world space, and wherever the surface of my model intersects with it, what the noise pattern looks like at that particular position in world space is applied to the surface of the model. So as I move the model around, I get different patterns. And that's a really important property of procedural noise that we're going to take advantage of today. Our goal is to create a snowy forest of trees. And generally, if you wanted to make every tree look different in the forest, you would need to unwrap every tree individually and create unique textures for every tree. And that's not very realistic to do in a real production environment, and so usually what ends up happening is all your trees look the same. And so what I'm going to show today is a technique of using procedural noise to generate unique looking trees without any additional effort. And so let's just jump right in. Alright, so we're going to start out with a really simple material. I have a new material that I just created called Snowy Tree Trunk, and right now all I have is a bark texture. And the first thing that we want to do is get our procedural noise mask looking correct. So I'm going to kind of move my bark texture out of the way, and I'm going to add a noise node. And instead of showing the bark, I'm just going to show the noise for now. So we're going to create a mask with our procedural noise, and then we're going to use that mask to blend between our bark and our snow, because we're creating a snowy forest. Alright, so the first thing that I want to do is make the noise a little bit more reasonable size. And again, just like we did in the previous example, we're going to be using the world space position. So I'm going to put down a world space position node and pass it in. And this is what's used by default, so you'll see over here that it's going to look the same as it did before. So I need to multiply, and some people use divide here, but I'm going to use multiply just to get my world space position in the right size. Then I'm going to add a constant value, and we're going to give this a value of 0.05 for now, and I'm going to pass that into my multiply, and then use that as my noise position. So you can see here we've got something that looks pretty interesting. And if I were to move this around, again, I'm not going to move it around here in the preview, but if I were to move it around, you would see that the object is swimming through my volume of noise. Okay, so I want to adjust this noise a little bit to get the properties that I'm looking for. The first thing that I want to do is, by default, the noise is set to simplex texture based, and you can see here it's high quality for direct use and uses 77 instructions per level with 4 texture lookups. And you can see that I have it set to 6 levels, so 77 times 6, that's a ton of instructions, and we want to make this a little bit cheaper to calculate, so we're going to set it to fast gradient 3D texture. So instead of doing a ton of math it's sampling the noise from a volume texture, and that's going to save us a lot of performance. So I'm going to set it to fast gradient, and the next thing that I'm going to do is turn my levels down to 3, so that'll cut the number of octaves that my noise is performing in half, which is going to help a lot. And I'm also going to turn off turbulence because I don't need it for this particular application. And then finally, all the rest of the settings I can leave the same. So you can see I've got this nice pattern here, and this pattern is going to determine where the snow is applied and where it's not. So I want to tweak it just a little bit more. So I'm going to clean up my graph and just kind of compact things here. And then I'm going to use a saturate node, and this will clamp things between 0 and 1. I'm going to use my mask to lerp, and so I want to make sure that my noise doesn't go above 1 or below 0, and that's what the saturate is doing. And then I'm just going to adjust it a little bit. I'm going to adjust the contrast with a power. So I'm going to pass this into power, and then I'm going to set it to a power of 0.5. And we'll take a look at what we're getting here. So what I've done is I've just kind of sharpened it up a little bit so the edges are a little bit more defined. Otherwise, it's a nice smooth gradient, which could be good for some things, but in this case, I want my snow to be applied very specifically in some places and not in other places. All right, so now we need to blend between our bark and our snow. And so I'm going to add a linear interpolate node. And in the places where the mask is black, we're going to have bark. And in the places where the mask is white, we're going to have snow. And so I need to add a constant vector 3 node. And this is going to be my snow color. So I'm going to pass that in. And then for the color of snow, I want to pick something that's mostly white and maybe just slightly darker than white, because PPR color values don't go all the way up to white. And then maybe just a subtle hint of blue in here. And this is just because the snow is going to be reflecting the sky. So maybe just a little hint of blue in our snow color. Okay, so I'm going to grab my mask nodes, move them down here. Then I'm going to lerp between my bark and my snow using my mask. Let's take a look and see what we get. Alright, that looks pretty cool, but there are a couple of things that I want to do to adjust this. The first thing that I'm going to do is make this 0.005. And I'm going to change the tiling on my bark as well. So I'm going to tile my bark texture 4 times. And there we go. So now I have a bit of a snowy tree trunk. Now, I could take this example a little bit further. For example, if I wanted to make sure that I always had snow on the bottom of the tree trunk, I could multiply by the Z world space position. If I wanted to make sure that I wanted to melt the snow on the on one certain face of the trunk, I could multiply the snow mask by the Y normal. So there are a lot of things that I could do here to adjust this snow and make it more interesting. But I'm just going to call this good for now, because we've got a pretty good example of blending between bark and snow based on our procedural noise. And now what I want to do is show you an example of what this might look like applied in a scene. So here I have a snowy forest environment, and I've applied my material to my tree. And you can see that as I move my tree around, the pattern that's applied for the snow changes. So the pattern of the snow on the tree depends on where I place it in the scene. And what that means is every tree that I place in my scene is going to have a different snow pattern. So instead of painting a different texture for every tree, because I'm using the procedural noise, I end up with a different pattern because of where the tree is placed in the scene. So this is pretty cool. It's a way of instantly getting, hundreds of unique looking trees without having done any additional work. A really nice application for the technique of Perlin noise, or procedural noise. Alright, that's it for this week's video. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and come back next Thursday and we'll have another example for how to use procedural noise in materials in the Unreal Material Editor.